A struggling trucker used his final cash to assist a stranded motorcyclist whom everyone else ignored. Soon after, motorcycle engines filled his property, not seeking vengeance, but settling an outstanding favor. When a formidable competitor attempts to permanently close his operation, this unexpected alliance stands as his sole protection. Dawn broke heavily above the rail depot's perimeter, throwing elongated silhouettes over corroded containers and wooden platforms holding nothing but emptiness. Within his workshop's open entrance stood Carlton Brooks, shirt cuffs turned up, petroleum stains beneath his fingernails, working deep within his weathered Perturbual 379's mechanical components. A broomstick propped the hood open while vapor escaped quietly from the damaged cooling line. Once more, he whispered to himself, retrieving the adhesive tape roll from his work surface. His equipment showed its age. His hydraulic platform screeched painfully. His joints ached from countless years manipulating tools without pause. Yet this vehicle and property represented everything remaining after his spouse died 4 cold seasons earlier. June suffered from pancreatic malignancy. Despite their efforts to respond, the disease progressed rapidly, mercilessly, and quietly, much like her personality. Carlton never disturbed the photograph of her still attached near the instrument panel. He simply gazed at it during mechanical failures or when quietness became overwhelming. When morning fully arrived, Carlton positioned a table outside the office container. Upon it, he arranged containers of warmed soup, day-old bread, 2 dozen citrus fruits, and a container of bitter dark coffee. A damaged placard announced, "Trucker's Pantry, Fridays exclusively. No inquiries, no payment." Ray Hernandez appeared first, a former refrigerated freight driver from Kansas who now moved with difficulty using a walking stick and disposable cup, acknowledging gratefully without words. Scarlett followed, a mother raising children alone whose vehicle failed the previous month and remained immobile. Then Jimmy arrived, followed by Reggie, then 2 unfamiliar faces. They arrived with empty stomachs. They departed satisfied. Nobody questioned Carlton regarding the pantry's sustainability. What remained invisible was Carlton foregoing his own nutrition. What remained unknown was that the food program operated on minimal savings from his transportation work becoming increasingly scarce since the Denon family now controlled major shipping agreements. Tony Denon, who established Denon Logistics, expanded his enterprise by eliminating independent operators like Carlton. With pristine vehicles, refined footwear, and abundant resources, he viewed Carlton's property as worthless refuse, an ugly blemish. For extended periods, Tony had been suggesting to municipal authorities and elected representatives that the property posed risks. "The surface isn't even sealed," he remarked dismissively during one community gathering. "And that supposed food distribution, it's a health code disaster waiting to occur." Yet Carlton possessed something Tony lacked: remembrance and conscience. The feeding program began during the week following June's passing. He had excessive remaining prepared food and nowhere to channel his sorrow. He nourished one stranger, then another. It evolved into a weekly tradition, and presently, despite financial hardship and isolation, he couldn't abandon it. That following Monday, Carlton entered a dusty roadside fuel station 2 communities away. His fuel gauge registered nearly empty. He tallied the wrinkled currency from the storage compartment, barely sufficient for partial refueling, perhaps. Upon entering the building, a disturbance halted him at the threshold that a middle-aged man with a lengthy, graying facial beard, wearing a leather garment, Hell's Angels emblem sewn across the rear, stood at the payment counter disputing with an adolescent employee. I explained I'll complete the electronic transfer. My device just lost power. No currency, no petroleum, the youth interrupted. I'm indifferent if you're a celebrity. Move aside. You're delaying others. Several people in the waiting line chuckled. One extracted his mobile device to record the incident. The motorcyclist's facial muscles tensed, though he maintained a calm voice. He appeared exhausted, unclean, and trapped. Carlton acted without hesitation. He advanced quietly, discreetly provided the youth with $20 and indicated pump number 6. The cashier appeared puzzled. Are you certain? Affirmative, Carlton responded. I've experienced similar circumstances. The motorcyclist turned, his expression showing incredulity. You're unfamiliar with me. Carlton raised his shoulders. Familiarity isn't required for assistance. He then departed, returned to his vehicle, and left without awaiting gratitude. Upon arriving home, the property was quiet once more. The distribution table was stored, the platforms repositioned. He stationed the vehicle beneath the partially deteriorated shelter and silenced the motor. That evening, he consumed half a sandwich containing peanut spread and consumed tap water from the workshop. He mentioned nothing about the motorcyclist. He anticipated no consequences from his action. It represented merely a brief moment, a charitable gesture released into uncertainty. Carlton Brooks possessed no awareness that somewhere along the roadway, a communication had already been transmitted that an individual they named Broken Wing was traveling with intentions, and that the sound of reciprocation was already approaching. Carlton Brooks awakened shortly before sunrise to an unusual trembling beneath his sleeping surface. Deep pattern consistent. Initially, he assumed it was troubled sleep. Then the drinking vessel on his bedside furniture began vibrating. He rose abruptly, pulse accelerating, moving his lower limbs from bed. His footwear contacted the surface just as the rumbling became unmistakable. Motors. Not a single one. Not two. Countless. Carlton dressed in a checkered upper garment and ventured outside, anticipating perhaps a roadway diversion or a spontaneous group passing through. But what he witnessed immobilized him completely. The rail depot was filling with two-wheeled vehicles. Not merely motorcycles, machinery, polished metal, and flat black. Emblems, head coverings, facial hair, body markings, injury marks. A modest force of motorcyclists thundered through his deteriorated entrance barriers, accompanied by two flat cargo vehicles transporting containers, ascending equipment, cylindrical containers, and something resembling a portable metal joining apparatus. Leading the formation was the individual from the refueling station, but presently he appeared substantially different. No longer exhausted and deteriorated, John Broken Wing, Rivers operated his motorcycle with alignment, authority, and intention. He controlled his Harley like a monarch on a seat of power. He halted 10 feet from Carlton and ceased the motor. The remainder followed with perfect coordination. The entire property fell into a peculiar, respectful quietness. Carlton's eyes widened. What in the world is happening? Broken Wing dismounted. He approached gradually, composed, extending his hand as if they were first becoming acquainted. You assisted me when nobody else considered it, he stated. You requested no identification. You requested nothing whatsoever. That kind of gesture doesn't escape notice. After Carlton assisted John, locating his freight property wasn't challenging. It was already recognized among transportation workers in the municipality, and the motorcyclists arrived to contribute labor. Carlton observed the offered handshake, then upward at the containers, the individuals already removing items. I am confused. You traveled this entire distance to accomplish what? Greet me formally? Broken Wing displayed a slight smile. Negative, gentlemen. We arrived to labor. Before Carlton could reply, individuals were removing lumber from the cargo beds, establishing frameworks around the distribution area. Two female individuals in leather garments distributed cooling containers and distributed coffee and morning sandwiches to the early arrivals gradually entering from the thoroughfare. Your overhead protection is destroyed, one informed Carlton while handing him a drinking vessel. We transported corrugated metal. It will endure this occasion. Another rider, an elderly individual with an artificial lower limb and reflective eyewear, positioned himself beside Carlton's Peterbilt. Tube fasteners are corroded severely. We'll address that situation. A third motorcyclist passed holding a substitute communication radio, displaying pleasure. Obtain something superior to that ancient device you had connected with adhesive tape. Carlton couldn't shift position, couldn't articulate words. The freight property hummed with greater activity than it had experienced in 10 years. Someone pressure cleaned the container's exterior surfaces. Another group established fresh coloring material containers. Carlton's distribution table received reinforcement with replacement supports. This wasn't merely repairing items. This represented restoration. By midday, Carlton discovered himself positioned beneath his recently metal-joined overhead protection, observing a modest group repaint the diminished artwork on the workshop wall's exterior. The previous one had been sun-damaged beyond identification, but the replacement version displayed a curving pathway, a sunset, and the phrases, "The property nourishes everyone. No inquiries, no criticism." He was uncertain what to articulate. Each time he attempted speaking, someone else provided him with an implement or shared a narrative. He discovered that Broken Wing had previously been a long-distance transportation worker before an incident destroyed his upper limb and terminated his operating permit. That the assembly wasn't exclusively motorcyclists. Numerous were military veterans, former transportation workers, previous mechanical specialists, wanderers who recalled the experience of being abandoned. Carlton invested the afternoon deeply involved with lubricating oil, working alongside individuals who didn't inquire about his history or his financial obligations. They simply provided him with components and labored in coordination. When evening arrived and the day ultimately decelerated, the freight property transformed into something beyond recognition. Decorative illumination hung from the overhead beams. Outdoor eating tables constructed from salvaged wooden platforms were arranged with disposable dishes and prepared meat. Someone had ignited a smoking apparatus on a cargo bed's rear. Amusement resonated. Carlton positioned himself at the epicenter of it, his eyes adjusting like an individual emerging from unconsciousness. He was no longer isolated or unnoticed. Across the municipality, Tony Denon occupied the rear compartment of his company vehicle, reviewing electronic correspondence while his operator, Wallace, directed the route toward the Denton logistics facility. The climate control system hummed softly. Something unusual up on Highway 6, Wallace mentioned, indicating to a road section ahead. Old freight property has motorcycles arranged like an extensive Harley gathering. Motorcyclists, cargo beds, several construction vehicles. Assumed that location was deserted. Tony didn't initially glance upward. Which freight property? The one near the railway tracks. That individual, Carlton Brooks, formerly operated transportation years previously. Now Tony observed his eyes contracting. He inclined closer to the transparent barrier as they passed a view of motorcycles and framework through the vegetation. He didn't articulate anything for multiple seconds. Then return tomorrow. I desire a closer examination. Upon reaching the facility, he departed stiffly, his typical composure interrupted by something intense beneath the exterior. Inside, he contacted his administrative aide. Retrieve everything we possess on Brooks, municipal regulation history, authorization submissions, possession documents. I desire it on my work surface by noon. Down in the repair area, Nick Denton removed perspiration from his forehead and emerged from beneath a refrigeration unit he'd been restoring for most of the morning. A younger technical worker passed holding a container of prepared food. Hey, Nick, did you observe all the motorcyclists at the old property? They're constructing something. Appears like an entire assembly out there. Nick positioned himself upright gradually. Which property? Carlton's, the individual stated. The person with the aged perturbulant. Assumed your father was attempting to acquire that terrain. Appears it's transforming into a community entity presently. Rather impressive, truthfully. Nick didn't reply. He simply acknowledged, cleaned his hands, and turned away. Though his consciousness remained behind that evening, he didn't complete his work shift. He simply retrieved his metal joining equipment, placed it in his vehicle's rear, and operated out toward the municipality's periphery, his pulse beating more intensely the closer he approached. It'd be why the time the sun contacted the elevated terrain, the property was illuminating with decorative lights and amusement. Nick advanced gradually, quietly. No promotional materials, no barriers, merely individuals laboring as if they belonged there. He stationed near the perimeter and entered on foot. A few heads rotated. Nobody prevented him. Carlton glanced upward from beneath a framework, surprised, though not hostile. Nick elevated his metal joining equipment slightly, the manner some individuals might extend a handshake. You have anything requiring repair? Carlton's eyes widened, then he acknowledged. Abundant quantities. Nick didn't articulate another phrase. He advanced into the illumination and commenced labor. Tony Denton had constructed his commercial empire with pristine footwear and more aggressive strategies. For 2 decades, he had acquired the vulnerable, eliminated the challenged, and enclosed everything else in legal documentation. He wasn't accustomed to hindrances, particularly not ones operating on repaired vehicles and charitable contributions. The observation of Carlton's property overflowing with volunteers, amusement, and media cameras made his abdomen contract. He contacted the Municipal Regulation Authority. No infractions. He contacted the fire official. Nothing. He even contacted a previous connection in code implementation, an individual who previously was indebted to him for assistance, but no success. Everything validated properly. More problematic, the municipality was discussing. They were appreciating Carlton's online publications, distributing photographs of the artwork, and designating the freight property as a local asset. The identical individuals who previously showed disdain for the location now delivered coloring material containers, containers of ground covering, and cooling containers full of chilled beverages. Tony wasn't experiencing anger anymore. He was experiencing insult, so he modified his strategy. Quietly, initially arrived the health evaluation official, note-taking device in hand, attempting to identify the food distribution storage as problematic. But everything had been recently sanitized and systematized. The refrigeration units operated properly. The cooling containers passed evaluation. Subsequently, a property evaluator traversed the area asking peculiar inquiries. Carlton replied with an acknowledgement and returned to smoothing a seating surface beside a young female, painting sunflowers on the exterior covering. Tony then dispatched a private investigator to examine the motorcyclists, background verifications, legal documents, but most of them possessed clean histories or distant past offenses that didn't frighten anyone presently. Actually, more than one of them were military veterans. Two even participated on the municipality's volunteer fire group currently. Every attempt Tony executed deflected like small stones against metal. Yet Carlton never responded. He didn't express anger, didn't even protect himself. He simply labored quietly. Each evening, Nick Denton arrived just as the sun contacted the vegetation. He never articulated much upon arrival, simply gestured and prepared his shirt cuffs. One night, he substituted the stopping mechanism lines on a volunteer's transportation vehicle. Another, he assisted excavating channels for a water drainage conduit near the rear of the property that he and Carlton labored side by side in a pattern that didn't necessitate conversation. They transferred implements, secured fasteners, acknowledged once when something aligned precisely. One night, beneath a pale yellow workshop illumination, as they completed repairing a material-moving vehicle tire, Nick ultimately articulated, "You're aware," he stated, securing the final securing fastener. "My father has been attempting to acquire this terrain for years. Claimed it was excessively valuable to utilize on refuse and charitable contributions." Carlton didn't glance upward. "I assumed as much. He attempted to get me to operate Denon Logistics," Nick added. "Informed me I could triple my compensation and position myself behind a work surface. Claimed I was destroying my existence if I remained in the workshop." Carlton positioned down his tool, and Nick provided a tired, partial smile. "Informed him I'd prefer to damage my spine accomplishing something genuine." They didn't communicate again for a duration, but something transformed that night, like an aged fastener ultimately releasing after years of corrosion. The property evolved day by day. The distribution table became a complete outdoor cooking facility. A local grilling organization donated a smoking apparatus, and presently Friday nutrition included prepared pork and roasted vegetables. Someone constructed a shade structure from recovered lumber. A few retired operators painted a map of the nation on one of the storage containers, designating every route they'd ever operated with red string and attachment devices. Children began appearing after educational instruction to assist sorting components and painting stones with cheerful communications. Veterans arrived too, aged, quiet, steady. They repaired what they could, acknowledged gratitude when handed coffee, and remained late into the night, metal joining, cleaning, and observing the celestial bodies over the property they'd somehow claimed as their own. Carlton felt not merely valuable, but linked. Then the correspondence came that IT arrived in a plain container, manually delivered by a municipal representative who refused to establish eye contact. Notice of environmental condemnation. According to the documentation, evidence of petroleum discharge had been identified in the ground, sufficient, apparently, to warrant closing the property for public protection. Carlton had 10 days to evacuate, remediate, or confront complete confiscation of the terrain. This correspondence arrived without any discussion or formal proceeding, merely an administrative exception buried in outdated municipal regulation. Carlton positioned himself on the loading platform with the correspondence in hand, observing dusk transform into night. The property behind him hummed with amusement and illumination, the replacement sign illuminating softly over the entrance barrier, the aroma of mesquite drifting through the atmosphere. He examined the correspondence again, then folded it gradually and secured it into his shirt compartment. Nick discovered him there a few minutes subsequently. "Are you acceptable?" "Not truly," Carlton stated, "but I will be." He didn't display the correspondence. He didn't desire to project a shadow over what had become a beautiful entity. But that night, after everyone departed, Carlton remained in the property long past midnight, positioned in a portable chair, observing the lunar body move behind a covering someone had suspended as a temporary roof. He was uncertain what arrived next. He simply recognized this location, this peculiar, noisy, repaired-together location, had become something genuine, and he wasn't going to surrender it without resistance. The notification still suspended on the side of Carlton's container, attached to the corroded exterior covering, its official marking catching the wind like a banner of capitulation. But nobody in the property treated it like a failure. If anything, the community established themselves more firmly by the second day following the correspondence. A portable table appeared beside the cooking facility, covered in note-taking devices and contribution containers. By the fourth day, an artwork assembly began painting a massive image across the aged aluminum barrier. A vehicle cabin surrounded by elevated hands, palms marked with petroleum, coloring material, and optimism. Each day, more individuals arrived. They arrived with drilling equipment, coloring implements, burning material, electrical connectors. Carlton didn't request anything. He simply kept appearing at dawn with coffee and a consistent expression in his eyes that communicated, "We continue advancing." Evenings transformed into outdoor cooking gatherings. Unfamiliar people transported portable seating. Veterans with diminished body markings shared narratives around portable heating devices. And the children, the identical ones who formerly crossed the thoroughfare to avoid the refuse property, presently marked bright illustrations all over the driving surface. Carlton didn't articulate much, but his existence was constant, composed, solid. The quiet epicenter around which everything rotated. On day 7, Nick arrived earlier than typical. He walked rapidly, holding a container thick with documentation and yellow property documents. His facial expression wasn't excitement. It was concentration. The kind of expression an individual wears when he recognizes he might be holding something substantial enough to modify everything. "I discovered something," he informed Carlton, removing him aside. The container contained aged property documents, property transfers, exchange agreements. But secured in the rear was a duplicate of a joint possession document from nearly 15 years previously, one that identified both Carlton and June Brooks as co-possessors of the freight property. And fundamentally, it displayed that any transaction necessitated both signatures. June's wasn't on the attempted transfer Tony had submitted years previously. It's invalid, Nick stated, rotating to the rear page. She never signed. My father assumed he could frighten you into departing before anyone noticed. Carlton positioned himself with the container in his lap, moving his fingers over the perimeters like it might disappear if he released it. I don't even recognize how to resist this, he acknowledged quietly. You don't have to, Nick replied. The documentation accomplishes it for you. Day 10 arrived excessively rapidly. The morning sun rose into an unclear sky as a line of dark vehicles advanced down the thoroughfare toward the freight property. Municipal representatives de partit, a regulation representative, a code evaluation official, an individual in a garment far too pristine for a location that smelled like petroleum and combustion residue. They anticipated the property to be vacant. It wasn't. Instead, they were encountered with a barrier. Motorcyclists aligned the front perimeter. Polished metal glinting, footwear planted, upper limbs crossed. Not aggressive, not loud, merely present. Behind them stood municipal residents, educators, food preparers, maintenance workers, mechanical specialists, military veterans, children with painted signs. One expressed, "This terrain nourished us." Another, "Condemn greed, not charitable contributions." Carlton stood at the epicenter, upper limbs folded. Nick beside him, the container in his hands. The primary representative cleared his respiratory passage, shifting uneasily. "Mr. Brooks, we're here under Ordinance 6A. Carlton provided him the documentation before he could complete. "You'll desire to examine that initially." He accomplished gradually, then again, his facial expression tightened with each paragraph. "You didn't mention joint possession," the individual whispered. "You didn't inquire," Carlton stated. Behind him, a motorcyclist activated his motor, not in threat, but in emphasis. The sound resonated across the property like a striking hammer. More vehicles arrived. Media vehicles. Correspondents departed. Imaging equipment operating, audio devices extended toward the assembly. A local presenter inquired a grandmother in an apron why she was positioned with motorcyclists on condemned terrain. "Because I consume nutrition here every Friday," she responded simply. "And I don't forget the individuals who nourished me when I possessed nothing." Tony Denon arrived last. He advanced in a refined, dark vehicle, departing like an individual still convinced the narrative was his to control. But when he observed the barrier of individuals, the imaging equipment, the silent opposition, his facial expression hardened. He advanced to Nick initially. "Enter the vehicle," he commanded. "You're not component of this spectacle." "Negative," Nick stated, establishing eye contact. "I'm precisely where I belong." Tony rotated to Carlton subsequently. "This isn't concluded." Carlton didn't retreat. "It's been concluded. You simply didn't perceive it yet." Tony's eyes moved to the representatives, but they were already retreating. One provided the container back to Nick with a reluctant acknowledgement. "There's no legal foundation for the eviction," he acknowledged. "The terrain's staying precisely here." As the sun began to descend behind the property, silhouettes extended long over the presently silent gathering. Carlton walked up the front, ascending structure of the container. The exterior covering had been recently colored, the transparent barriers cleaned, the inclined surface reinforced. Above the entrance barrier, a replacement illuminated sign activated into life, manually constructed by a motorcyclist named Lenny, who formerly operated a sign establishment in Nevada. The property accessible to everyone. Carlton rotated and observed everyone. No oration, no declaration, merely an acknowledgement, a modest, exhausted smile. Individuals applauded. Someone released a burst of amusement. And gradually the assembly began to settle, retrieving food, exchanging narratives, activating music from an aged radio as the initial celestial bodies appeared into the evening sky. Subsequently that night, Carlton stood isolated beneath the illuminating sign, consuming a cup of coffee. Nick walked up beside him, upper limbs crossed. "Did you ever assume this would occur?" Nick inquired. Carlton expressed soft amusement. "I assumed I'd lose everything." "You didn't." Carlton observed out across the property. "Negative," he stated. "I ultimately discovered it." They didn't communicate after that, merely stood in the illumination of something born not from orations or expressing loudly, but from soup, ignition components, and the gradual, steady hands of individuals who recalled what it signified to appear. This narrative reminds us that charitable contributions resonate more powerfully than arrogance. What would you accomplish if assisting someone signified risking everything? Inform us in the comment section. And if you believe in quiet champions, don't forget to appreciate, distribute, and subscribe for additional narratives precisely here on Embrace the Journey. Observe you in the subsequent video.